It was the afternoon of June 12, 2025. At exactly 1:48 p.m. local time, a woman named Pumi Chowan was dashing through the airport terminal, desperately trying to make it in time for her flight to London. She had been caught in traffic and, despite her best efforts, she arrived 10 minutes too late. Breathless and frustrated, she stood there cursing the city's chaos until a sound from nearby made everything stop. The television screens above flickered to breaking news. The very plane she was supposed to be on had just burst into flames only seconds after takeoff. Her heart froze. That could have been her. All around her, passengers waiting at nearby gates stared in horror, having witnessed it unfold with their own eyes. Within moments, panic spread across the terminal. What followed became one of the most horrifying stories in aviation history. Air India Flight 171 had just lifted off from Ahmedabad, headed for London Gatwick, only to plummet straight into tragedy. The question that shook everyone was, how does a modern aircraft crash just after takeoff, without a single warning? This was a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, a jet built for long-distance travel, capable of comfortably carrying over 200 passengers. This particular plane had been in service for 11 years, logging more than 41,000 flight hours. For a commercial aircraft, that wasn't old, it was well within its prime. It had a reputation for reliability. Nothing suggested what was about to happen that day. Flight AI-171 was scheduled to land in London at 6:25 p.m. local time. On board were 12 crew members and 230 passengers, including 11 children, 2 infants, and Gujarat's former Chief Minister, Vijay Rupani. The flight deck was manned by experienced pilots. Captain Sumit Sabharwal had over 8,200 flight hours, while First Officer Clive Kerr had logged over 1,100. The skies were clear and the weather calm. Everything pointed toward a routine flight. And yet, the unimaginable occurred. At 1:38 p.m., the plane left the ground from Ahmedabad's Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport. It accelerated smoothly down the runway and lifted into the air, like countless flights before it. But instead of climbing steadily into the sky, the aircraft began to falter almost immediately. It barely gained height, managing to rise just above 625 feet, barely higher than a tall office building. Then, horrifyingly, it began to descend. From the control tower to the passengers on board and the onlookers near the airport, everyone knew something was terribly wrong. Inside the cockpit, the pilots quickly realized they were facing a catastrophic issue. A mayday call was made within moments of takeoff, but time was slipping away far too quickly. Before any recovery could be attempted, the aircraft slammed into the Meghna neighborhood, a densely populated area just outside the airport fence. Among the buildings struck was a student housing complex for BJ Medical College. The sound was unlike anything the city had heard before, a deep, growing roar followed by an explosion that rocked the ground. A massive fireball rose into the sky, trailing smoke visible from miles away. Within seconds, a part of the city had transformed into a war zone. Charred debris was scattered across the neighborhood. The tail section of the aircraft remained standing, darkened by fire, barely holding together. The letters VT on the tail was still faintly visible through the smoke, confirming to investigators and onlookers that this was indeed Air India Flight 171. But what the rescue teams discovered was even more horrifying than anyone imagined. The plane had come down just at the edge of runway 23, so close to safety, yet devastatingly far. The force of the impact had torn the fuselage into countless pieces, with parts flung across hundreds of meters. One chunk of the tail was wedged into the ground just steps away from a family home. The scale of destruction was staggering. But it wasn't only those on board who suffered. This crash wasn't confined to the aircraft, it tore through people's homes and lives. By the time authorities released an official statement, the death toll had reached 294. Tragically, 53 of those victims were on the ground, not even flying that day. The student hostel had been obliterated, and with it, the dreams of many who lived there. And yet, in the middle of all this devastation, a miracle emerged. A man named Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, seated in 11A, somehow survived the catastrophe. Just 30 seconds after takeoff, he recalled hearing a loud, mechanical bang. Then chaos erupted. Bodies were thrown around, and everything turned red and black. He came to his senses surrounded by wreckage, his chest and leg injured, his clothes soaked in blood. But he was alive. Stumbling and limping, he crawled away from the flaming debris. In a sea of death, Vishwas was a singular testimony to the randomness of fate. As authorities rushed to respond, India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation launched an immediate investigation. In the United States, Boeing and GE Aviation, the companies responsible for the aircraft and its engines, also mobilized support. The U.S. government declared it would send safety experts to assist, as per international aviation agreements. India, meanwhile, was expected to release a preliminary report within 30 days, but that would contain only the basic facts. The real answers would come only after the black boxes were recovered, devices designed to store critical flight data and cockpit recordings. Despite their name, black boxes are actually painted bright orange to make them easier to find in wreckage. One records every technical detail, engine performance, altitude, direction, while the other captures audio inside the cockpit, alarms, pilot voices, and ambient noise. As of now, the rescue teams were still combing through the wreckage, prioritizing the discovery of these crucial devices. No air traffic control audio had yet been released. Until those recordings were analyzed, there would be no official conclusion. All that was known for certain was that the aircraft had barely left the ground before everything fell apart. No one could explain why. And what made it all the more unsettling was this: no Boeing 787 Dreamliner had ever experienced a fatal crash before. Bird strikes and contaminated fuel were also considered. If birds had struck both engines at such a low altitude, or if the fuel was somehow compromised, it might explain the failure. But again, no clear evidence supported either theory yet. And then there was the structure of the aircraft itself. Unlike older planes, the 787's body was made from composite materials, strong and lightweight, but relatively new to commercial aviation. Earlier this year, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration had issued a caution about a specific part, the forward pressure bulkhead, a structural wall that helps maintain cabin pressure. While no failures had been recorded, the FAA had advised airlines to inspect it as a precaution. At this point, investigators had no proof that this bulkhead had played a role, but they couldn't rule it out either. The pilots, too, came under review, but nothing so far pointed to human error. The Mayday call confirmed they were alert and trying their best to control the situation. The aircraft didn't fall nose down or spin, which suggested that the pilot still had some control before impact. It simply lost lift and couldn't climb, almost as if something invisible had gripped it mid-air. Until the black boxes were found and examined, the root cause remained out of reach. The aircraft's final position, barely a few hundred meters from the end of the runway, only deepened the sense of confusion. It was so close to returning, yet never made it. Amid this search for answers, new and troubling information began to emerge. An Indian entrepreneur named Akash Vatsa had flown on the exact same aircraft just hours earlier, from Delhi to Ahmedabad. During that flight, he noticed multiple strange signs: flickering cabin lights, non-functioning seat screens, and a faulty air conditioning system that left the cabin hot and stuffy. Something felt wrong, so Akash recorded short videos and shared them online, hoping the airline might take it seriously. Then came another account from Sharad Raval, a 75-year-old man who had flown on the same route just a month before. On that night, the plane's interior lights had failed repeatedly, leaving passengers in darkness for hours. No explanations were given, and eventually, the flight was cancelled. When it was rescheduled the next day, it was delayed again. At the time, it all felt like poor airline service. But in hindsight, those incidents now seemed like warnings no one had listened to. Then came Richard Rawes, who worked at Spirit Aerosystems, the supplier for the Dreamliner's main body. He raised alarms about defects in the forward pressure bulkhead, the very component the FAA had warned about. He too lost his job after speaking up, and perhaps most disturbing of all was John Barnett, a former Boeing quality inspector who had gone public in 2021. He said broken and faulty parts were being used in assembly lines, safety checks were skipped, and even oxygen systems might not work in emergencies. John claimed pressure from management forced workers to cut corners. In 2024, he died under mysterious circumstances, deepening suspicion. Now, with Flight 171's crash, these warnings feel less like isolated concerns and more like a pattern. A disaster that might not have started in the skies that day, but years earlier on the factory floor. Was it truly just an accident or the result of years of silence, pressure, and ignored warnings? The answers may lie in the black boxes, but the questions are already loud enough. If you found this story insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.